Thanks to all of you for joining us today, and of course for all my guests, of which I'll introduce many of them here shortly. We're here today to announce an important lawsuit that my office will be filing against the Trump administration. We'll be leading a coalition of states from around the country, and I'll get to the details of that momentarily. As many of you probably know, the United States State Department has voluntarily entered into a settlement with an organization whose stated mission is to globally distribute downloadable ghost guns that anyone can create if they have a 3D printer. The Trump administration recently chose to give access to potentially untraceable and undetectable firearms to any felon, domestic abuser, or terrorist with a laptop and access to a 3D printer. Let me be clear, no background check, no waiting period, no serial number. Some of these 3D printed guns are made with materials that will not set off a metal detector. After almost 18 months of the Trump administration, I was skeptical there was anything else this administration could do that would truly shock me. But they have. This decision is unconstitutional, it is unlawful, frankly, it is terrifying. This unprecedented move is not only disastrous for public safety, but undermines our state laws meant to keep firearms out of the hands of dangerous individuals. For example, Washington voters recently overwhelmingly approved the most expansive background check system in the country because we have made it a priority to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous individuals. The Trump administration is now undermining those important efforts. This settlement has already been filed with the courts, and we recently learned that the organization in question, Defense Distributed, plans to post its downloadable ghost guns online this Wednesday. We intend to stop that from happening nationwide. Today I'm filing a federal lawsuit and a motion for a temporary restraining order in federal court here in Seattle. I want to be clear that'll be filed later on today. I'll be introducing the team momentarily, but they're literally going to be working through the day to get this filed later on today. I want to introduce a few of the folks who are here today. I appreciate everyone's time coming on very short notice. Like a lot of this litigation, it's a lot of work in a very compressed period of time. So first, I'm going to introduce Renee Hopkins to my right, who's the Executive Director of the Washington Alliance for Gun Responsibility. She'll be speaking after I give you some introductory comments about this lawsuit. Also pleased to be joined by a number of elected officials, including Dan Satterberg, our King County Prosecuting Attorney, Mayor Jenny Durkin, Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best, Seattle City Attorney Pete Holmes, State Senator David Frocht, Senator Patty Kuderer, Representative Mike Pleciotti, also joined by a number of different organizations and individuals, including Pam Van Sweringen and Kathleen McLaughlin from Grandmothers Against Gun Violence. I have to say, of all the organizations out there, that organization is one of my favorites. I have to say, Catherine Person of Everytown for Gun Safety, and Nellie Shiloggy from Washington Ceasefire. I'm also going to introduce some of the folks on the legal team who have been working really hard. One person who's not here is Todd Bowers. He's one of my deputies. He's upstairs working on the case right now and coordinating with other states. Jeff Rupert, who is down here to my left. Jeff works, he's the head of our complex litigation division, and he'll be staying to help answer questions as well that you may have about the case itself. Also joined by Kristen Beneski, who's here to Jeff Sprung's left, and also Jeff Sprung. Jeff and Kristen may have to slip out, and probably will slip out a little bit early as we're working hard. They're working hard to file this. One thing I'll say before they may have to slip out is that, look, many Washingtonians were enjoying a really beautiful weekend this weekend, outdoors. The legal team was not doing that. I was talking to the team throughout the weekend. They were working late each day, Saturday night, Sunday night. I was talking to Todd, God knows what hour last night, and he still had a long night ahead of him. So they have worked around the clock, reaching out to other states, bringing them in. It's been a lot of work to bring this. These lawsuits are always complicated. The people hours involved are, as the lawyers here like Jenny and Pete and others know, it's a lot of work, and they do an outstanding job. I just want to mention I've been in communication with other AGs around the country throughout the weekend. Washington is leading this case. That's why we're filing it here in Seattle. But we will be joined by a number of other states. This list is fluid. We expect other states to potentially even join later today or as we go forward with this litigation. But right now, I can confirm that the following states will be joining us. That's Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Oregon, Maryland, New York, and the District of Columbia. Brianna from my team and the communications team will keep that updated as we go forward. So let me give you a little background on the case and the issues, and then I'll turn it over to Renee, and of course we'll take your questions. So the State Department is the agency responsible for enforcing the Arms Export Control Act. This is a very important law. At a high level, this law regulates the export of weapons and technology that could be used to harm our country. It was signed into law by President Ford, I believe, in 1976. When Defense Distributed first began posting downloadable ghost guns, the Obama State Department appropriately forced the removal of these files. Defense Distributed sued the Obama administration in 2015. Since that time, the administration, the federal government I should say, has been arguing that sharing these downloadable gun files violates the firearms export laws. In one declaration, for example, the State Department said making these downloadable gun files available online, I'm quoting now, through unrestricted access to the internet would provide any terrorist organization with defense articles, including firearms, at its convenience, subject only to its access to a 3D printer, an item that is commercially available. Terrorist groups, I'm still quoting, and other actors could then potentially manufacture and use such weapons against the United States or its allies. That is the State Department speaking in court. The federal government continued making that argument under the Trump administration. As recently as April of this year, just a few weeks before settling this case. Indeed, when this litigation was going on, 2 federal courts agreed with the federal government, and the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review the case. Instead of continuing to defend the lawsuit, that they were winning at every stage. I want to emphasize that. They were winning at every stage in that litigation. The Trump administration abruptly reversed course, entering into a settlement that, among other things, requires the federal government to waive export controls for Defense Distributed's downloadable guns. So let me be clear. For years, the federal government, including the Trump administration, argued that these downloadable guns could be used to threaten U.S. national security. Weeks later, they rushed to settle with Defense Distributed without any explanation or rationale. They went out of the risk of a sports analogy, right? They essentially threw the game. They're winning, right, decisively throughout this litigation. And then, arbitrarily, they say, we're going to settle this case. Don't take my word for it. Alan Gottlieb, with the Second Amendment Foundation, who's involved in that case, said, quote, the government fought us all the way and then, all of a sudden, folded their tent. He literally, I think, has a quote saying, we asked for the moon and they gave it to us. Previously, when the State Department has removed these export controls for a particular item or technology, it has undertaken a thoughtful and rigorous process to understand how that move might affect national security and has informed Congress of what it was doing. For example, in the early 90s, the State Department formed an interagency working group before it lifted restrictions on certain GPS receivers. The State Department does not have the unilateral authority to lift these restrictions for any reason, especially without even notifying Congress in advance. Our lawsuit argues that lifting these restrictions on downloadable ghost guns is unlawful. It's arbitrary and capricious. These are words that are used in the law in something called the Administrative Procedure Act. For those of you who've been to these press conferences before, we talk about the Administrative Procedure Act, something that can put any audience to sleep, except for the fact that we keep beating the Trump administration by signing the APA, the Administrative Procedure Act. There's a reason why we've never lost a case yet against the administration. No federal judge anywhere in the country in any of our 32 lawsuits has ruled against us on the merits. Often we're winning because they refuse to follow the Administrative Procedure Act. That act requires rational process from our government. It's a federal law that requires rational decision-making. The Trump administration doesn't do that. The government has to essentially show their work before making a decision like this that impacts our society to such a degree. What the government did here is contrary to the purpose of the Arms Export Control Act. The federal government engaged in this action without any study at all. And the federal government has not complied with its notice requirement for lifting the restriction. For example, the president must provide at least 30 days notice to Congress and the Department of Defense. We have no evidence it has done so. We also assert that's unconstitutional because it undermines the state's 10th Amendment rights to regulate firearms, something folks here care about a great deal because our legislators and others have worked so hard to enact laws and the people have worked hard to enact laws to keep us safe. We have strong state laws designed to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous individuals. I cited one at the beginning of my comments, so I'll give you another one. We have laws that say if you are convicted of felony domestic violence, you don't get to own a firearm. That's important for obvious reasons. The Trump administration's actions undermines those laws, to put it mildly, undermines those laws. They eviscerate those laws. Now that individual can simply download a gun with a 3D printer. We're also filing a motion for a temporary restraining order. both to block the Trump administration from issuing a waiver for those files and to stop Defense Distributed from posting them online. I'll just take a moment before I turn to Renee to say this case is different than a couple others that are out there or that may be out there later on today. So we're the first state and leading group of states to take on the administration, okay, in federal court. New Jersey is participating in our case, but they will have their own action in state court that we expect them to file shortly. So their relief would potentially be different. They have a state court, a federal judge can implement changes nationwide. In a separate case, Pennsylvania, you may have read, received an injunction in federal court, but for Pennsylvania only. That's not nationwide relief. They have received an injunction just for Pennsylvania. They have sued the individuals and Defense Unlimited, not the administration, Pennsylvania. I guess just a couple thoughts before I turn over to Renee is the Trump administration, there's so many issues where folks can have a policy disagreement, right? I get that. I'm from a large family, 7 kids. Believe me, at the Thanksgiving Day table, there's lots of disagreement, all sorts of issues. You pick it. But honestly, for God's sakes, when it comes to something as basic as public safety, our State Department saying, hey, this is a giveaway for terrorists. It undermines all the hard work that everybody here behind me has dedicated much of their professional lives to of keeping us safe when it comes to guns. It's a case they were winning over and over again. To say they caved would be an understatement. Is this decision political by the Trump administration? You bet. I'm often careful to say I don't want to get into motives or this, that, or the other thing, right? I try not to interpret someone's actions. I'm sorry, there is no other conclusion. None. At all. And who pays the cost? The public. It's outrageous. I mean, honestly, if we were at a bar having a beer, my language would be even stronger. I can assure you, okay? So fortunately, we have folks like Renee, who leads a wonderful organization that's dedicated to keeping our community safe. I'm going to ask her to say a few words, and then we'll turn to taking your questions. Thanks,
Great.
Renee.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Renee Hopkins, and I'm the CEO of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. And since Sandy Hook, Washington State has been leading the charge on state-based change for common sense, effective gun laws. At the ballot, we've expanded background checks and given families and law enforcement the ability to keep firearms out of the most dangerous hands. Our legislature, led by many of the people here today, have passed a number of laws that make it easier to remove guns from abusers, make sure that victims are actually notified if an abuser is trying to buy a firearm, and in general made our state safer. In addition to the state level, we have leaders like Jenny Durkin and Peter Holmes and Dan Satterberg who are willing to make change at the municipal and county levels as well that we know is so vital and important. All of these improvements have been based on one fundamental assumption, that in our Washington, licensed gun dealers are the source of guns. Our system of firearms laws keeps our communities safe. It's also one that we know Washingtonians believe in and support. The people of the state have regularly, year after year, voiced their desire for safer gun laws and policies which keep guns out of the most dangerous hands. 3D printed make-at-home guns would completely undermine our system and effectively our laws. They would make our state less safe, put Washingtonians in more danger, and make it much harder for law enforcement to determine the origin of guns used in crime. We know that states with stronger gun laws experience fewer deaths and injuries from guns. And these are real human lives we're talking about. Easing the ability for dangerous people like domestic abusers and convicted felons to access firearms and effectively undermine laws will result in lives lost to gun violence in our state that do not need to be lost. The Attorney General's action today to stop print-at-home guns before it's too late is more than just the right thing to do. It's what we must do to keep our state safe and maintain the gun laws which keep guns away from people who should not have them. I'm encouraged to see Washington continue to lead the way on gun violence. Thank you to Attorney General Ferguson and for all of the leaders standing behind me and partners in gun violence prevention for the commitment to continue keeping Washington State safe for families and communities.
Thanks. And so just before taking your questions, just to recap, we're filing today. The complaint is not done. It'll be filed this afternoon. We'll get out to you as soon as it is ready. The communications team's been working really hard as well to get this information out to you. And we're filing this against the administration. We're seeking a restraining order, which means we're asking this court to act essentially immediately to prevent this action being taken by Defense Unlimited on Wednesday. So things could potentially move very quickly. With that, we'll take questions. We'll do our best to repeat the questions. I think there's some folks online, so I'll do my best to repeat. Feel free to direct question anywhere you like, and others, I've encouraged others to jump in and help answer questions as well as they see appropriate. Essex, yeah.
The Second Amendment Foundation is also saying that they won the case on the grounds of the First Amendment, that computer code is free speech and restricting it is a prior restraint on free speech.
So the question is relates to the First Amendment and the Second Amendment saying that they won the case based on that. First, they didn't win any case, right? The federal government settled the case with them. That the foundation lost at every step in this legal proceeding. We want to be very clear about that. They won nothing in the courts. But yes, the federal government caved and entered into a settlement with them. But that issue of the First Amendment, which is obviously an important one, has not been litigated in the sense that they haven't won anything with that argument. We are confident that our claims will be successful. We haven't lost a case yet against this administration. We think in large part because they are sloppy in how they execute their work. They do not follow federal laws like the Administrative Procedure Act and how they do it. We've had this conversation many times before, Essex, and each time we continue to beat them at this. So, yes, I understand the other side will make their arguments. They're welcome to that. But the federal government has an obligation to follow certain procedures. They make changes of this type of magnitude, and they haven't done that.
Do you see anything to that First Amendment argument that computer code is speech and should not be restrained the way free speech should not be restrained?
Nothing changes the federal government's obligation to follow federal law in making changes like this. Nothing changes that, and we don't believe they'll be successful with that argument, or the federal government for that matter.
How practical is it to make something like this, though? Is it something that is that easy, where you're saying it's going to flood the community and everyone's going to be in danger, or is that too much of an exaggeration?
Yeah, I'll let others may want to jump in as well. I'll start, but others may want to, and the mayor, well, why don't you just go first, Mayor? So this is Mayor, for those on the line, Mayor Jenny Durkin will take the first half of and the question, to repeat it, was, hey, will this really flood the market? How much of danger really is this? Is the technology that far advanced? Can folks really access it? So first, Mayor Durkin, go right ahead.
Thank you, General. I just want to answer that. In my previous role, people know that I was the U.S. Attorney for Western Washington. I also chaired the Department of Justice's Oversight Committee on Cybercrime, and I held the highest security clearances that you could hold at the department. We know that there were a number of terrorist acts in America when I was U.S. Attorney. Here in Seattle, Washington, in several states, and I will tell you without going into specific details that on the scale of 1 to 10 of things we worried about, this was an 8 or a 9. The thought of people being able to print out weapons in a garage and all they would need is a printer and the materials. Think about all the hours you spend in line trying to get on an airplane. And we have those things in place after the terrorist attacks on 9/11. Now you have to think, if a person has a printed gun that's made of the right materials, they will be undetectable. And everyone sitting on an airplane will be put at risk. Every secure building, the same thing. You can print these at scale very easily. And going back to Essex's question about First Amendment rights, there are a number of things that cannot be disseminated because of national security interests. There's all sorts of technical information code that Boeing has, that that people have, that are restricted on how you can disseminate it because of national security interests. This is not a question of gun rights. This is really, if there were a terrorist and criminal rights organization, they'd be cheering today. Because this is all about how people who shouldn't get guns can get guns easily, and they're the worst kind of guns. Guns you can't detect, guns with no serial number, and guns that literally are ghost guns. So I applaud the General and the other states for bringing this action. We cannot walk away from these basic public safety demands by doing this wholesale runaround. It hurts the public, it hurts our country.
So this is going to go online August 1st as of right now.
Mhm.
So are we going to be, or you guys going to be able to stop it in time?
Yeah, so the question is, this goes online August 1st, Wednesday. Are we going to be able to stop it in time? And yes, that's our goal. We'll be asking the court to hear this matter immediately. And courts do that. In Pennsylvania, for example, they literally had a hearing Sunday night. Last night is when they had their hearing. I believe they filed Saturday, if I recall correctly. And then the very next day on a weekend, the federal judge had a hearing and said, okay, I'll put an injunction in place for Pennsylvania only, of course, right? But federal judges are sometimes used to having to move quickly when things of this magnitude are at stake. And so that is our request, is to put a stop to it, put an injunction in place so the court case can move forward while an injunction is in place.
Hasn't this code already been posted long in the past? And does it matter whether you can stop it now if it's already been out?
I mean, I'll start, but others may want to jump in as well. And
So they're asking right now about the.
so that's not me answering, by the way. So there's a voice on the phone.
I'm
I think
throwing
someone
my
is
voice.
muted. Exactly. Right. Exactly.
The question
and-
is, to further people on the phone, the question was, isn't this code already out there, and so are you just closing the barn door after the horses have gone?
Yeah, and so I guess the first point I'll say, and open to others, including Jeff on the legal team if he wants to add, is that no, we think that it is important to put a stop to this right away and make it as difficult as humanly possible for anyone to access this information. Anybody want to add to Jeff? Anyone? So
Oh,
this,
yeah, just
Jeff,
one
come
other
on,
point.
Jeff, come right on down. Yeah, come right on down. Squeeze. And this is Jeff Rupert, the head of the Complex Litigation Division.
Sure. One of the rather amazing things about the settlement is that they're taking items off the munitions list that they don't even apparently know. It's any items that Defense Distributed has created in the interim years. It's not clear what those are or what the nature of the weapons will be, but those are included in this sudden move by the Trump administration to allow these guns to be accessible. So we don't exactly know what Defense Distributed has, so we know of certain ones that were downloaded, but there's clearly some out there that nobody has had access to, but they will on August 1st unless the judiciary puts a stop to this.
And could I just add?
Go right ahead, Jenny. Yes.
Sorry, Mayor Durkin, I'm sitting here with our chief of police, and I think it shouldn't be lost on people how hard our cops are working every day to make our streets safe, and how many guns we take off the street and keep out of the hands of people who shouldn't have guns. I mean, the chief can address it directly, but we've taken a number of guns out of the hands of domestic abusers so they can't use them. This will allow those people to simply download a program, print a gun, and use it for purposes. So first, maybe the chief wants to address that.
I'll jump in, sure.
Go ahead, Chief.
Good afternoon. This is Carmen Best, Chief of Police, Seattle Police Department. And to echo what the Mayor and Attorney General Ferguson have said, there's nothing more important than public safety. We work really hard to make sure that criminals, do not get guns and are not able to use that against the public that we serve. This year to date, we've already taken over 700 guns off of the street. If people have the ability to download these guns arbitrarily, the danger to the public is going to be so immense. It's beyond what I could even describe here today. So we are fully in support of, not being political in any way, we're just in support of making sure that we keep the community safe, and we know that this is the way to do it. And we'll support anything, any civil action, any action at all, any litigation, anything that the electeds and the legal people bring forward to make sure that we're keeping people safe.
Chief, you were once in charge of criminal investigations. How difficult would this be for your detectives if guns can't be traced, they have no serial numbers, nothing you can use to identify?
Well, I think it's pretty easy to imagine how difficult it would be if people were able to download these 3D guns without any ability to trace them, to know when they're used, to know who has them, to know how they're being used in crimes. It could be potentially so dangerous. It's unimaginable, and it's absolutely unthinkable that we would support anything other than putting a stay on this.
And maybe I'll open up, see if anyone on the phone. It's always a little tricky. We often have multiple people on the phones. It's easy to talk over each other, but I just want to open up for a chance if anyone on the phone would like to ask a question.
Mr. Ferguson, it's Pete Williams from NBC News. Hasn't Cody Wilson already started posting this material? And it seems like I just tried it while you were talking. It seems like he's already starting to make the downloads available, even though his website says it won't start till August 1st.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Pete. I may have Jeff Rupert from my team address that, and I think he addressed that a little bit earlier when he talked about, hey, there are, that there are, and Jeff, maybe want to come back to maybe reemphasize that point of what this entity may have and what we see is happening right now.
Again, to answer your question directly, I'm aware that apparently some files are being posted. It's unclear exactly what is being posted right now and how many downloads are happening. But we are working as fast as we can. But to address the point that Bob was mentioning there, this company had put forward a number of models that were previously known, but there could be an infinite number of additional ones that nobody's downloaded so far. So we're trying to monitor what it is, and things are developing quickly, and we're going as fast as we can, but we're working with what we have, too.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And I think your question, frankly, underscores the importance of seeking this temporary restraining order, which we are. We do sometimes seek a temporary restraining order. That is difficult. The relief in order to get a temporary restraining order, the standard is challenging because you have to show that you're likely to prevail on the merits, that the harm is potential harm is significant. But to your very question, I think goes to show, hey, this individual is now, it sounds like, attempting to post this right now, not waiting till August 1. Frankly, we think that type of information will help us as we seek a TRO, so nothing further gets downloaded. Any other questions? Jenny, and just to your question, Pete, I think Jenny Durkin, the mayor, has a response as well.
Pete, I just wanted to add to that, as the general has pointed out before, that before these kinds of rules are changed, there's a normal process that an administration has to go through. And in the normal process, before revoking this type of rule that implicates national security, there should have been a robust discussion in the intelligence community and the National Security Council. My guess is there is no evidence that occurred, and I can almost promise you that the intelligence community would not be happy that ISIS or Al-Qaeda in Iraq or any of those people could download untraceable ghost guns that could rate as munitions.
Other questions from? Thank you. Other questions from those?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sarus Paravar. I'm a reporter with the technology news website Ars Technica. Hasn't the settlement in the case involving Defense Distributed already taken effect? And yes, to reiterate the comment earlier by the gentleman from NBC, I'm looking at Defense Distributed's DefCAD website right now. They have, I believe there's 10 files currently available. Each one has been downloaded over 1,000 times already. So I'm curious as to, even if your legal efforts are successful, it seems to me that, you know, as I'm sure you well know, these files can very easily be distributed not only on Mr. Wilson's website, but on many other websites outside of the jurisdiction of the United States. So it seems like, to quote somebody who said this earlier, you know, it seems that the horse has already left the barn.
I guess a couple thoughts. I don't want to repeat too much of our previous answer, but I think you mentioned been downloaded 1,000 times. I think you said the goal will be to communicate to the court that we want to shut this down immediately so it's not downloaded any further, or additional firearms that that this entity may have that we're not even aware of, that they will also be able to post online at some future date. So there are many variations of what this entity is seeking to do. They've started that process. That will underscore to us the importance of getting to this federal judge immediately to have it shut down as quickly as possible.
Would your restraining order extend to other websites beyond Defense Distributed?
That's a good, Jeff, I'll have you answer. The question that Essex asked was, would our restraining order, what would it extend to in terms of being able to access on the internet, other websites, for example? Jeff, are you able to answer?
Yeah.
And feel free to stay close by,
Yeah,
Jeff. After,
our injunction will be seeking to have the government go back to the status quo that it was, where it's on the munitions list, and if you do this, you are subject to federal prosecution and all the other things that might bring. That's what we're seeking, so it would apply to them in that method.
It would apply to all websites.
Yes.
and stay right here. So, but at that point, that point is important that Jeff raised, right? That if we are successful, we go back to the status quo, that it would be unlawful to be posting this information. And the consequences are significant if you were to violate that federal law, which I think also goes to some earlier questions as well about, hey, are things out of the barn already? Well, no, you can have, go back to the status quo where if someone did try to post that information, there are very serious consequences for violating that federal law. Any other questions here in the room? Any final questions on the phone before we wrap up? And we'll be available one-on-one for the folks here in the room, but any final questions online before we wrap up?
Mr. Ferguson, if I could ask one more question.
Yes.
Pete Williams, I just wanted to be clear about Pennsylvania. I thought what happened there was the judge basically denied the TRO request as moot because Defense Distributed had voluntarily agreed to block people from Pennsylvania from getting it. Is that right?
That may be, Pete. I've not read it myself. I've had a number of conversations with Josh Shapiro, the Attorney General in Pennsylvania. My takeaway is that there is essentially an injunction in place for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's my understanding. It is certainly not nationwide. The specific way in which the judge issued that ruling, I've not read it yet to know that. But that is essentially the effect of it, is that there's essentially an injunction in place for Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania only.
Got it. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. And I'll just emphasize as we start to wrap up is, this is a very fluid situation. The questions that we're getting go to that, right? This is a very fluid situation in terms of our litigation, in terms of what may be being posted in real time as we're literally having this conversation, all of which goes to underscore the magnitude of what's happening. This individual is not waiting until Wednesday, which is the day in which this information was to be posted. He's doing it now.
Hi, Graham.
He knows what's going on,
I'm listening to
and he
the
understands what's going on, and he understands what's going on and the impacts there. But that underscores the critical nature of this litigation and what's at stake in this litigation. Frankly, we think that will help us in our case as we ask a federal judge immediately to put a stop to this, to go back to where things were a mere handful of weeks ago, in which it would be unlawful to post this information and make it publicly available. I guess just to wrap up, I want to thank everybody here. I wish we could have heard from more voices, but there are folks here who, as I mentioned before, I want to emphasize, have really dedicated, much of their life's work to addressing this issue. And to see something like this, of this magnitude, happen in such a way, as the mayor said, I think she said there's no robust discussion. I think we'd all agree, as far as we know, there was no discussion at all. I mean, I just want to be crystal clear about this, right? And that is what is so, frankly, that is so maddening. Our Congress has carefully crafted laws decades ago to protect us. A Republican president signed that into law, right? That has been something that we now take for granted as a very basic principle of public safety, internationally and here domestically. And in one moment, without, as far as we can tell, any consultation whatsoever with experts, the administration undoes it. And we believe that the way in which they've effectuated this change will hurt them in court, as it has so often in the past with litigation we've brought against this administration. Over and over, they refuse to follow the rules when they make changes to laws, and they've done it again this time, and that's why we think we'll be successful. Thanks to all of you for being on the phone, and we look forward to chatting with all of you here one-on-one. Thank you very much.